line, and that conflicts with another provision of this law, the provision that says there shall be, under certain circumstances, recounts. And then there's a rather detailed description of the process that's necessary. The timeline for when you can ask a recount is on the 6th day.
Up to.
Yeah, up to. And it would be impossible in a populous county to, in one day, do what the statute instructs must be done when there's a recount.
She makes a very strong point.
Well, you can ask for the recount right away after the election, and it's up to you to decide when to ask for that recount, and it's completely in the discretion of the county canvassing board as to whether to grant a recount or not. If you wait till the last minute and ask for something to be done that can't be done during the time available, and then they say no because there isn't enough time to do that, that's your responsibility. We have to have standards that guide us, and there are timetables and limits on which all of these things can be done. If you decide to throw a pass at the last minute and you don't have enough time to get your team on the field, that's your responsibility. We have to have an orderly process here, and everybody should want that, and we shouldn't be changing things after the fact to benefit one side or the other.
What will the Supreme Court do, and when will they do it?
If I knew that, I wouldn't be sitting here now. I'd be using those processes of prophecy to become a trillionaire. I don't know what they'll do. I suspect there's a good chance that they will say, you know, we didn't really need to take this case. There's no real federal urgency. And I suspect that whatever they do, they'll do it quite soon.
Monday, Tuesday?
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I don't know.
But this week?
I would be surprised if it was longer than this week.
What will they do and when?
Well, I'd like to answer that the same way. I certainly don't know. We did our best and put our arguments before the court, and they will decide. I'm rather encouraged that the Gore people would like the court not to decide the case. That gives me some comfort and encouragement. I think that they will decide the case, and I think it will be soon.
Yeah, and you think it will be decisive?
Well, I think that the court will decide the case and give us a decision. I just don't want to predict what they're going to do, but I do think that they're going to give us a line of decision. The justices were very, very well prepared, as everybody in America knows. They're ready to decide the case on the merits.
Ted Olson, Larry Tribe, thank you very much. Thank you for representing your clients and sharing your information with the American people this morning.
Thank you, Tim.
And we'll be right back right after this.
CNBC Asia. Profit from it.
Have impugned a state Supreme Court the way you are doing in this case.
I would emphasize that what the Florida Supreme Court did is basically essentially say, we're rewriting the statute, we're changing it.
It seems to me that as a tiebreaker, as a way of shedding light on the provisions that are in conflict, so long as it's not done in a way that conflicts with a federal mandate, they're not violating any.
Mr. Tribe, I don't agree with that. I don't think that the Florida Supreme Court used the Florida Constitution as a tool of interpretation of the statute.
With us for the Bush campaign, Attorney Theodore Olson. For the Gore campaign, Attorney Laurence Tribe. Olson and Tribe, the lawyers who argued before the Supreme Court on Friday, with us this morning. But first, will the Republican-controlled Florida state legislature now be involved in this campaign on behalf of George W. Bush? Joining us, the Speaker of the House of Representatives of the state of Florida, Tom Feeney. Mr. Feeney, welcome.
Good morning, Tim. How are you today?
Good morning. Will there be a special session of the Florida legislature this week to appoint electors in the presidential race?
I can't guarantee that we'll begin this week, or actually can't guarantee we'll begin at all. I will tell you that the Florida House of Representatives has hired some of the best and brightest scholars in the country to advise us of our duties under Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution. I've been reading the Federalist Papers, James Madison in Federalist 45, Hamilton in 68. The bottom line is I'm convinced we have a duty to act unless the U.S. Supreme Court resolves this matter with finality in the next few days.
If, in fact, the Circuit Court in Florida says that Al Gore should have a recount of those 10,000 non-votes in Miami-Dade County, and they show that Al Gore is ahead, would the legislature go forward and still appoint electors loyal to George W. Bush?
Well, again, I have a sister branch in this. We're relying on the Florida Senate. I think they've hired an expert that has advised them, the same as ours have, that they have a duty and obligation in this regard. The problem isn't who's ahead, and you said that we might get involved on behalf of George W. Bush. The real problem is our obligation is to the people of Florida to make sure that we don't get left out of the Electoral College process. And actually, Title III of the United States Code says that when you have this sort of chaos and you don't have a final determination of all the contests and controversies, or when you have a change in the law after the election day, that Congress could reject your electors and you may not participate. That's why Madison in Federalist 45 explained that the state legislatures must be prepared to be involved, and that's precisely what Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution requires.
But if the Florida Supreme Court were to declare Al Gore the winner, would you go forward and have an alternate set of electors?
Well, I think at this point the only thing that could deter us from doing our constitutional duty would be if the United States Supreme Court renders a decision that brings finality to this. The bottom line is, Justice Scalia and others pointed out the other day, this is not a matter for the Florida Supreme Court to overturn the legislature, as in many cases it is in interpreting state law. Article 2, Section 1 gives this power, a plenary power, which means absolute and whole, and it can't be abrogated by another branch, to the Florida legislature, not to the state of Florida. So we have an obligation that cannot be interfered with either by the executive branch or the Florida Supreme Court. If you listen carefully to the argument on Friday, I think you found that this is an unusual situation, but it is the Constitution.
So it sounds like you'll listen to the U.S. Supreme Court, but not the Florida Supreme Court.
Well, on a matter that the U.S. Supreme Court may, and by the way, when we filed our amicus brief, we asked the U.S. Supreme Court to decide that this was not a justiciable issue for them. The Bush campaign asked for them to decide it was a justiciable issue. But we want the U.S. Supreme Court, if possible, to just acknowledge Article 2, Section 1 and say, in effect, the Florida legislature has been instructed by Title III of the United States Code and by the Constitution to resolve chaos like this, and we're going to rely on them to do it.
It sounds as if the Florida Senate, headed by John McKay, is a little less anxious, more reluctant to go forward than you are.
Well, I don't think any of us are excited about this. This is a hot potato that's been dumped in our lap by the United States Constitution. It's not, this is a duty that we absolutely believe we have. We've got some of the best advice in the country telling us this. Even Professor Tribe, Al Gore's #1 lawyer on Friday, when Justice O'Connor asked him to specify whether or not we could act, he said, I don't know. That's a pretty strong acknowledgement from the #1 lawyer for Vice President Gore. And the bottom line is the Florida Senate is being very deliberative. They're studying the recommendations of the Joint Committee, and I think they're acting prudently. We'll be prepared to act when they are.
Will this take the form of a legislative bill or a resolution? The difference being the governor would not have to sign a resolution, he would have to sign a bill.
The timing and the details of when and what we will do, what the Constitution requires us to do, have not been worked out. My own personal view is that this should be a resolution. If you believe, as Scalia implied the other day, and as I believe, and as all of our experts testified, that this power is plenary with the legislature, then you would use a resolution, because a bill may require the governor to either veto it or sign it. And so under the theory of our founding fathers, I think probably a resolution is the appropriate way to go.
If in fact the deadline is December 12th, how much time do you need to pass a resolution before December 12th?
Well, depending on whether you could get folks to waive the rules and act promptly, as short as 2 days, but my preference would be that we not wait until the end here. We could always stop a special session if the U.S. Supreme Court somehow resolves this. I believe that our duty will not change between now and December 12th. There are some 20 to 30 lawsuits now. There are all sorts of contests. The average contest in Florida takes 17 months to resolve. I'm afraid that not everybody in the Gore camp, but maybe some, would like to see Florida not not participate on December 18th when the votes are cast. And I think we have a duty under the Constitution to make sure that Floridians are represented.
Well, Mr. Feeney, the 12th is a week from Tuesday, so you're going to have to act this week if you want to play a role.
Well, Tim, I'm prepared to go, and it's not because we're anxious to do it. It's because I believe that we're obligated to do it, and I'm prepared to go at any time.
Isn't, in fact, there a war between the Florida legislature and the Florida Supreme Court? They have declared unconstitutional the Governor Bush's school voucher program, a death penalty bill, parental notification for abortion for girls seeking, for parents for girls seeking abortion. There's been a lot of hostility between the legislature and the Supreme Court of Florida.
Well, but it's not personal hostility. Actually, Justice Wells, the Chief Justice, came and swore me in as Speaker of the Florida House. He's a friend. I count several of the justices as friends. I think there are some philosophical disagreements. You're always going to have a tug of war over and a power struggle between the three branches of government. But none of this is personal, Tim. I do believe in this case when they changed the statutory deadline for resolving the vote count and when they told the Secretary that she may not exercise her discretion, that they changed the law. And the problem with that is that Title III, Section 5 says if you're going to have an election to pick your electors, you can't use law that was changed after the election. That's when mischief occurs. So we've got two problems. We've got a change in the law after the election that was imposed by the Supreme Court. We've got the fact that these contests could last for months or even years. Either one of those would be enough reason for the United States Congress to say, under Title III, Section 5, we don't have to let Floridians participate in the election. That's the constitutional issue that we have to deal with.
As you know, this is very controversial. You had a public hearing on this, and Reverend Richard Harris of Ball Glade, Florida, testified. I want to show a portion of that and give you a chance to respond.
If you sit here today and put in your personal agendas and your personal will and try to force that on the people of this great state of Florida, then you will be no better than the thieves that walk into a bank and rob that bank with a gun.
The Florida legislature trying to steal this election for Governor Bush is this strong insinuation.
Well, in the first place, the last thing we need at this hour are ad hominem or personal attacks. I would commend Reverend Harris to Federalist 45, authored by James Madison, who said that the legislatures must resolve these sorts of problems. And Federalist 68, where Alexander Hamilton said that in order to avoid tumult and crisis in selecting the president, that the state legislatures must be involved. The bottom line is we're not trying to steal any election. We are trying to preserve the election as it was conducted under the law that existed before the Florida Supreme Court changed it, and I think we have a duty to do that.
And you will act this week, probably?
Well, I'm prepared to act at any time. Again, I've got a sister branch in the legislature. We're a bicameral legislature, as most are. It's not unusual for the Florida House, just like the lower bodies of most chambers, to act a little bit quicker. We're sort of like the House of Commons. We're closest to the people. We're all elected every 2 years. So it's not unusual, and in this case, we're prepared to go a little bit sooner than our brethren in the Senate.
Speaker Tom Feeney, thanks very much. And with us now, the Republican vice presidential candidate, Dick Cheney. Welcome to Meet the Press.
Morning, Tim.
You just heard the Speaker of the House of the Florida legislature. Would you encourage the legislature to go forward and select a slate of electors, pledge the George W. Bush, who would cast their votes for Governor Bush in case there's still legal turmoil in Florida?
Well, Tim, we clearly don't control the Florida legislature. I think is demonstrated by the fact that the brief they filed with the U.S. Supreme Court took a somewhat different tack than the one we took. They do have a constitutional obligation and responsibility that I think Speaker Feeney articulated very clearly. They've got to take whatever steps they think are appropriate in terms of carrying out those responsibilities. And I think they're doing that. But I'm not in a position to be able to predict what the final outcome is likely to be there, nor to say, you know, you should do A, B, C, or D. Those are decisions they'll have to make as independent actors in this drama that we're all part of.
He seemed to suggest that if the Florida Supreme Court declared Al Gore the winner, it wouldn't be relevant to his thinking, that he would obey the U.S. Supreme Court, but that the Florida legislature is paramount to the Florida Supreme Court. What would that mean for the legitimacy of your administration if you won by electors cast by the Florida legislature rather than those approved by a Supreme Court of Florida?
Well, let's remember what's already happened here. There are electors that have been selected. There has been a count and a recount and a certification. The electoral process has been followed. The laws of Florida have been followed. The Supreme Court intervened, added 12 days to the period of time. We went through that whole process, and we still emerged as the certified winners of the Florida election. I don't see anything that's going to change that. Now, Al Gore has decided to go back in and use the courts to try to overturn this certified presidential election. First time that's ever happened in history. I see the legislature, in effect, saying, look, here we are nearly a month after the election. We still don't have a concession from Vice President Gore. The matter's still in the courts, being debated, and they could end up on December 12th having to act under their obligations and responsibilities under the U.S. Constitution.
But the U.S. Supreme Court could say that Al Gore is right. There should have been a manual recount. And the Circuit Court in Florida could say, count those 10,000 votes in Miami-Dade. And the judge in Seminole County could say those 15,000 absentee ballots shouldn't count because the applications were incorrect. And you would have a situation where the Florida Supreme Court will say Gore won, and the Florida legislature say, no, Bush won. And you have two sets of electors come to Washington.
Tim, I mean, you know, it could snow in Miami tomorrow, too. I mean, these are all hypotheticals. What we have to deal with are the facts. The facts are that we've been through this very long and involved process. We've followed the law, the statutes of the state of Florida, the Supreme Court of Florida. The whole electoral process has been followed very, very carefully here. And the conclusion is that George W. Bush won the Florida election. And we have been certified the winners. Now, Al Gore's back in court trying to overturn that. We're in arguing our side of the case. But to predict, you know, if this, then that, if we've learned anything in the last month, it is we ought to be very careful about making those kinds of predictions.
The Miami Herald front page story today, what if the vote were flawless? Without hanging chads, voter mishaps, Gore would have had edge. The Miami Herald calculates Gore would have won by 23,000 votes if all those dimpled ballots and swinging chads were counted on his behalf. The thesis of the story that more people went to the polls in Florida with the intent of voting for Al Gore than the intent of voting for George Bush.
There is a process by which we cast ballots, count ballots, make decisions, and that process has gone forward. I have not seen the article, so I don't know what it argues, but the notion that somehow we had all of these people vote or intended to vote and their votes somehow didn't get registered, I just don't think it's valid, but it's being tested in court anyway. If we're going to go down that road, why don't we say, look, NBC and the other networks made an early call on election night, decided that Al Gore had carried Florida, and announced it before the polls closed. And thousands of Republicans in the panhandle of Florida who would have otherwise cast their votes for George W. Bush and myself stayed home because
they've been
told, well, I know that you guys announced the result before the polls even closed.
But can you prove that thousands of Republicans stayed home?
There's been statistical analysis that's just as valid as the statistical analysis in the Miami Herald this morning. What we have is we've had votes, they've been cast, there's a process for counting, a process for recounting, a process for certification. We've been through that process, and we now ought to get on with the business of putting together the new government.
Why not agree to a statewide hand recount overseen by former President Ford, former President Carter, so that once and for all you can get a clear, honest, statewide count, and people can say, and both campaigns agree to it, and then there's legitimacy to whoever wins.
Well, let's see, what are we going to do with the hanging chads, the dimpled chads, the intent trying to devise? There are no clear standards for how that ought to be handled. If you go look at what happened in Broward County, there's a brief I just happened to read in the last day or two that we filed with respect to the Broward County recount, where they changed their standard after they started the counting process, where the 3 individual supervisors used different standards in terms of evaluating the so-called dimpled chads. It's virtually impossible to have an objective process for undertaking that kind of overall statewide recount. We think the right answer is that, in fact, the ballots have been counted and recounted, in some cases counted 3 and 4 times, and the results have been certified in accordance with Florida state law. Let's get on with it.
You think Al Gore's a sore loser?
I don't want to get personal about Al Gore. He's, I think I understand, I think all of us understand how difficult this is for him. With the enormous investment he'd made in the campaign, it would be hard for anybody to go through that process. I do think that it's time for him to concede. So far, he's chosen not to do that, to pursue other avenues, and clearly that's his prerogative. But I think long term, I think history would regard him in better light if he were to bring this to the close in the very near future.
3 times in our history, 1824 with John Quincy Adams, 1876 with Rutherford B. Hayes, 1888 with Benjamin Harrison, we've had presidents who lost the popular vote but won the Electoral College. All 3 were one-term presidents. And in fact, Rutherford Hayes was called his fraudulency because of the discussion, debate that went on post-election as to who should win the electors from Florida, ironically. How concerned are you that if you do win, that your presidency will never have a fair chance and it'll be destined
like the other three who lost the popular vote to simply one term and a very ineffective 4 years?
Well, but I can recall some other presidents, Thomas Jefferson, who emerged from a very complicated, convoluted process, some 36 ballots, I believe, in the House of Representatives before the decision was finally made that he'd won the presidency, an enormously successful president. So I think there's evidence on both sides, Tim. It'll be up to what we do with it. It'll be obviously a challenge in part to how well we govern, to our ability to build bridges to the opposition, whether or not the country will come together. I think the prognosis is pretty good because I don't believe the country is deeply divided. I think this is a time of relative peace and prosperity in America, that we should be able to pull together. We don't have the kinds of deep divisions that in times in the past, in centuries past, have been such an important part, if you will, of dividing the nation north and south over the slavery issue or other kinds of issues that have been historically very, very difficult for us to deal with as a nation. We are united as a people. We are the most powerful nation on earth. We've got phenomenal success for the last 200 years, and we can build on that and move forward. But it's going to be hard, difficult to do. But I think the notion that somehow it's doomed to difficulty, or that the next administration is bound to be only a one-term administration, I don't think that's a valid judgment. I don't think anybody can make that forecast.
Governor Bush and you campaign on a platform of a $1.3 trillion tax cut. Now that the Senate is 50-50 Democrats, Republicans, and the Republicans control the House by 8 or 9 votes, won't you have to scale down your tax cut in order to pass it?
Well, I would think clearly you're going to have to work very hard with a 50-50 Senate. I could end up living on Capitol Hill as the vice president with a tie-breaking vote, president of the Senate. But circumstances have changed too. There's growing evidence out there, Tim, that the economy is slowing down. We're seeing in automobile sales. There's a lot of other areas, earnings falling off for corporations. And we may well be on the front edge of a recession here. And I would hope that would change people's calculations with respect to the wisdom of the kind of tax cut that Governor Bush has recommended. That we do, in fact, need to take into account those economic circumstances.
Do you think we're on the front edge of a recession?
I think so. Now, I'm not an economist. I just am following it enough to know and to see out there that there is growing evidence that the economy is slowing down. And I would think the kinds of tax changes we recommended, and that Governor Bush recommended, especially in terms of reducing marginal rates, for example, are in fact exactly what needs to be done with respect to providing the kind of stimulus to ensure the resumption of long-term economic growth.
But in reality, with a 50-50 Senate and a close, small majority in the House, you're going to have a moderate, mainstream, centrist governance, aren't you?
Oh, I think so.
Much more than the conservative principles that you adhere to, or Tom DeLay or Dick Armey. Are you going to be sitting on Tom DeLay and Dick Armey, trying to keep them in place?
They're both good friends of mine. I served with them in the Congress when I was the whip briefly in the House of Representatives. Tom was going to be my chief deputy whip. Dick Armey's been my congressman while I was in Texas for the last 5 years. Dick Gephardt's a good friend. I've known Dick. We came together to Congress about the same time. So it's entirely possible. I worked years ago, Tim, for the governor of Wisconsin under 2 circumstances. Under one circumstance, we had 2/3 control of the legislature. In the next session, it was 50-50. 50-50, we got a lot more done because there was much more discipline, because everybody had to work together. That was the only way anything was.
And low expectations.
And low expectations. But I think there's no reason in the world why we can't do exactly what Governor Bush campaigned on, and that the very closeness of the balance in the Congress will, in fact, be a spur to cooperation rather than a bar to.
But true conservatives out there might be a little disappointed because in order to get someone on the Supreme Court, for example, they have to be confirmed by the Senate. You're going to have to stay to the center.
Well, I can assure my conservative friends that there'll be a strong conservative voice in the councils of the administration. But in the final analysis, Governor Bush will make those decisions. I think he's had an excellent track record in Texas. He's been very good at achieving worthy objectives by bringing people together, even when the other party controlled both houses of the legislature. And there's no reason in the world why we can't do that in Washington.
Trent Lott, the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, and Speaker Hassett were in Texas yesterday. Lott refers to Governor Bush as President-elect Bush. Should the country?
Well, we're getting close to that moment. Governor Bush at this point still prefers Governor Bush, and that's the way we're referring to him, and that he's asked the staff to address him. We've not yet crossed the Rubicon, so to speak, to the point where we feel comfortable using the other title. By the way, did you notice the feather in Trent's hat yesterday?
Quite impressive.
Mississippi cowboy.
When will you make appointments to the cabinet? Secretary of State, Attorney General, Secretary of Defense?
As soon as possible. We've spent a lot of time. We spent 6 hours with General Powell this past week.
He's going to be Secretary of State.
Well, we haven't made any announcements yet, but he clearly is a man we're consulting with extensively on all of these issues. We spent a lot of time yesterday with Speaker Hastert and Leader Lott on a lot of the same questions. Governor Bush is spending a big chunk of his time on all these issues. We have not yet set a timetable in terms of an announcement. Right now, it has more to do with making decisions and getting people signed on and committed rather than anything else in terms of pacing the timing. But I would expect that certainly within the next couple of weeks we'll be able to start making some announcements.
You'll have some well-known Democrats in the cabinet?
We are casting the net very broadly, and Governor Bush has given us directions to do exactly that, to look at, maybe he wants a cabinet that represents the best in America.
So blacks, women, Hispanics, all be represented?
Is diverse and in every sense of the word, politically and in terms of ethnic background and experience. Those are all valuable commodities and dimensions that he wants us to focus on, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Let me turn to your health. November 22nd, you had a heart attack, as you well know, better than I do. Governor Bush appeared on television at noon, and this is what he had to say.
Turns out the subsequent tests, blood tests, and the initial EKG showed that he had no heart attack.
Now, this is 2 hours after you had undergone surgery to open up an artery. People at the hospital, your doctors, knowing full well that you had a heart attack. Why would the governor tell the nation something wrong?
But let's remember, the governor's in Texas. When I went into the hospital that morning, walked in under my own steam, by the way, Tim. The heart attack label is appropriate in a technical sense, but as heart attacks go, it was not a big deal.
But a fourth heart attack's always of concern.
Always of concern, and that's why I went to the hospital. But the early test in terms of electrocardiogram, enzyme levels, and so forth showed no change. I talked to the governor on the telephone, and that's the information he had from me during the course of the day. After that, I then went in and undergo the angiogram, which is a decision we made after I talked to the governor. The doctors recommended it. We didn't know for sure whether there was a problem, but it was worth going to check out. It had been several years since I'd had the full-up angiogram. So we went in. We discovered while I was in there that there was, in fact, a narrowing in one of the branch arteries. That's when they went in and put the stent in. And I did not know at that time even that there'd been any change in the enzyme levels. And we were really focused on it because we're in the room doing the procedure. It wasn't until later that afternoon that I became aware, for example.
So you insist there was no intentional attempt to mislead the country?
Absolutely not. And we had sent the doctors out twice that afternoon to brief, to make sure that everybody understood what
the first time they said there wasn't any heart attack.
Well, that's what was the, they didn't say there was no heart attack. They said there's been an elevation in the enzyme levels, which is the technical term.
They came out at 4:45 to clarify.
So use the exact same words so nobody can say we misled anybody.
In July, when you were on this program, I talked to you about your bypass in 1988, and after which time you served effectively as Secretary of Defense, I might add.
Right.
And it's eerie, it's almost prescient what you talked about. Let's just watch that for a second. Bypasses usually last 10 to 12 years. Will you be in need of another one soon?
Well, that used to be fairly standard guidance. If you can manage your disease properly, which is much more feasible today, then that either extends the time before you have to do it again or obviates it altogether. There are other options available, like stents, for example, that weren't around 10 years ago, where you go in and do a catheterization and insert a stent in the artery to keep it open. So there are a lot of possibilities like that. With luck, I'll never need anything else. But if I did at some point, one of those procedures is a possibility. But obviously, if I thought that was imminent, I wouldn't be here today.
You called it.
I said stent procedure was possible. I'm delighted the technology's there. What they were able to do for me is something that would have been almost impossible 10 years ago.
But you also said if I thought it was imminent, I wouldn't be here today. Right. It turned out to be imminent. Should you be here today as Vice President based on your health? I'm
here based on the strong recommendation of my doctors, first-rate cardiologist and internist who followed my case for years, who would never advise me to proceed as I am if there was any doubt about my capacity to do the job. My health is that of a 60-year-old, nearly 60-year-old man. I do have a history of coronary artery disease, but the angiogram, among other things, showed there'd been no progression in the artery disease over that last 12-year period of time, except for this one narrowing, which has now been repaired with a stent. So if anything, Tim, According to the doctors, I'm stronger and healthier now than I was 6 months ago because we've gone in and done that procedure. So I'm very comfortable with my current circumstances. The doctors have given me the green light to proceed. If I had any doubts about that, or if they expressed any doubts or reservations about my capacity to do the job, I would not do it.
You'd step aside?
Absolutely.
When will this all end? When do you believe that George W. Bush and Dick Cheney will be able to say, we are president and vice president-elect?
Well, I think we're getting close. I would hope that it'll get resolved within the next few days. December 12th is a date that a lot of people have focused on. I think hopefully it'll be over and wrapped up by then. I would hope it would happen sooner. We really, from the standpoint of transition, a lot of people do not understand we're down to only about 6 weeks left. It is very hard to put together a complete government for the United States, tougher than it's ever been because of the complexity of issues and clearance procedures required. We really, really need to get on with that as quickly as possible, and we are, I think, rapidly approaching the point where there will be damage to the nation, at least to the capacity of the next government to function, if we don't get this resolved shortly.
You've been extremely visible, leading some to suggest that Dick Cheney, in fact, is de facto president, and George W. Bush is simply in the wings, and that you're going to be running the government.
Well, you know, the same people that are saying that are the ones that criticized him when he picked me last summer because I wasn't from a big state or I wasn't going to help him in terms of the Electoral College. Now people saying nice things about me, they turn around, they don't give him credit. He deserves the credit for the fact that I'm here. He's very heavily involved in all of this. We talk several times a day on the telephone. I think he's going to be a very effective executive because he grabs people, puts them on a problem, gives them their head and says, go solve it, and then holds you accountable for your performance. It's the way I like to work. And if it's working well, he's the one who deserves the credit. He's the candidate. He's the man who put together a very successful national campaign strategy. He's I think, about to become the president-elect of the United States. And to the extent that we've had any success at all, George W. Bush deserves a lot more credit than I do.
You've introduced 2 words to the American political lexicon: big time.
Right.
Any comment?
No comment, Tim.
Dick Cheney, we thank you for joining us.
Thank
and the
you.
next time you'll be back, you'll be Dick Cheney or Mr. Vice President.
I hope so.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Coming next, The View from the Gore campaign with the Democratic leader of the House of Representatives, Dick Gephardt. Then, the 2 lawyers who appeared before the U.S. Supreme Court on Friday. For the Bush campaign, attorney Theodore Olson. For the Gore campaign, attorney Laurence Tribe. They are all coming up right here, a special edition of Meet the Press.
Meet the Press is sponsored by Morgan Stanley Dean Witter. Move your money. Get well connected.
CNBC Asia. Profit from it.
With business threats and possibilities just around the corner, the new Nokia 6210 with WAP makes you ready to hit your targets.
In many countries, on many projects, with many communities, Chevron has made a commitment to be a global energy partner that keeps its promises, that keeps its word. Chevron, the symbol of partnership.
The next generation of wireless communication is here, and technologies from Agilent are helping make it all possible. We've taken the fiction out of science fiction. Agilent Technologies, dreams made real.
Meet the corporate gurus from all over the world on Money World.
It's a great era for Asia as we move out of the old world economy.
Find out what's redefining the new economy.
The age we live in is really, in many ways, defined by information.
What's shaping new business models.
Times are changing. Big in this world is better.
What are the new ways of creating wealth? Sunday, only on CNBC Asia.
Squawk Box is now bigger and packed with even more market talk.
Bringing you the latest market news.
The auto sector, that's one to watch out for.
China-backed software maker.
Stocks to watch.
Kind of floundering.
Guest analysis.
What sort of hike are we talking about?
We only expect 25 basis points.
Easing the restrictions on dual listings.
We're very, very bullish about our numbers in Asia.
So be sure to profit from the extended Squawk Box weekday mornings only on CNBC Asia.
And we're back. With us now, the Democratic leader in the House of Representatives, Dick Gephardt. Welcome.
Good to be here.
A clear majority of the American people now say that Al Gore should concede. Why won't he?
Because a majority also say that they want an accurate vote. Everybody's interested in getting this over with. I don't know of anyone, I haven't talked to anyone that doesn't want this behind us. But I think the American people clearly want to get the accurate result. They want all the votes counted. They want to know who won. Al Gore won the national popular vote by over 300,000 votes. There's really about a 100-vote margin left in Florida. And if the Miami-Dade ballots would be counted, if the court decides to count them, we're going to find out who actually won this election. And I think everybody wants to know that.
The Vice President himself has said it's not the popular vote nationally, it's the Electoral College that counts, according to our Constitution.
Sure.
In terms of Florida, the Gore campaign wants to count the 10,000 no votes, if you will, in Miami-Dade, but there were 175,000 of those non-votes in the state of Florida. In 8 counties, a higher percentage than there were in Miami-Dade, but those are Republican counties. In all fairness, if you count those 10,000, why wouldn't you count all 175,000 in Florida, or for that matter, all 1.5 million across the country? For example, in Oregon, Al Gore won by 6,000. There were 30,000 non-votes for president. In New Mexico, he won by 400. There were 6,000 non-votes for president. New Hampshire, Bush won by 7,000 votes. There were 10,000 non-votes. Why not count all the non-votes in Florida and across the country?
Well, Tim, from the beginning, Al Gore asked the Bush campaign to agree to have a total hand recount of the state of Florida. It's interesting, right now the Republicans are asking for a hand recount in New Mexico. So it is clear that that should have been done from the outset. Al Gore offered that 3 times. The Supreme Court of Florida asked the Bush campaign if they didn't want a total recount, hand recount of the state of Florida. So clearly that could have been done. It still could be done. It may be the best way to resolve it. But right now you're in a legal process, you're in a contest, and so what's at issue is Miami-Dade and Palm Beach, and that's what the Gore campaign is asking to be recounted. But I think they'd be happy to recount the whole state.
If the Supreme Court of the United States says, Al Gore, George Bush is right, there should be no recount, or if the Circuit Court in Florida says no recount of Miami-Dade, should Al Gore then concede?
Well, Tim, that's an iffy question. We don't know what the Supreme Court of the United States is going to say. That'll probably come this next week. We don't know what the decision of the Circuit Court in Florida will be. That will probably be appealed to the Supreme Court of Florida, no matter who wins in the Circuit Court. So there's a million hypotheticals out there. I don't want to give an indication of what the Gore campaign might or might not do. Look, this is real simple. We need to find out who won. You know, it would be terrible a month from now, after this is all over, if Gore is not the winner, not declared the winner. Somebody's going to go back and recount these ballots and look under the Freedom of Information Act and look and see who actually won. Would we want to wake up a month from now and have the national popular winner and the actual winner in Florida not be the President of the United States?
If, in fact, the Florida Supreme Court allows the recount of Miami-Dade alone, and they say Al Gore's won the election, and the Florida legislature said, no, 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 George W. Bush was certified, and there are 2 sets of electors that come to Washington. The House of Representatives has to decide which set to accept. The Republicans control the House. They'll probably say Bush. The Senate would say Gore, because it's 50-50, with Gore casting the deciding vote. But the Bush electors would be seated because they'd be certified by the governor of their state. What would that mean to the legitimacy of a Bush administration?
Well, I hope that doesn't happen. I really think all of us have to work together. Republicans and Democrats, people in the Congress, people in the Florida State Legislature, and then the judicial branch in Florida and the country, to see that we get a legitimate result that both parties can accept and that the country can accept. I feel very strongly about that. This is a test for our country. We don't always have a close presidential election like this. This is such a case. Our electoral process was probably not up to this in parts of Florida and probably other parts of the country. We got to improve that. But in the meantime, we have what we have, and we've got to work together to see that the process, the rule of law is served, and we get to a winner that everybody can accept.
Mr. Cheney said he thinks a recession's coming on, and all the more reason for a big tax cut. One, do you think we're near a recession? And two, will a $1.3 trillion Bush tax cut pass the Congress if Bush is the president?
Well, I don't think we are in a recession. I hope we're not. I don't think we are. I think things have slowed down a little. I think they needed to slow down a little. I think we've gotten a little too far too fast. But the productivity figures are still good. The growth figures are still reasonable in the 2% plus range. I do think we need a tax cut. We fought over that in the last 2 years. I think whoever's president, we're going to have a tax cut. I hope it's not a huge one that I think would overdo it and get back to overheating the economy. But I think we definitely need a tax cut for middle-income Americans and people that have really had the worst time, even in this recovery.
$1.3 trillion?
Well, we see it more in the area of $200 to $500 million. But we're going to have to compromise.
$1 billion.
$1 billion. And we're going to have to compromise and come to something that'll work. But I'm confident that we can do that and make sense and do the right thing for the economy and the people.
Secretary Cheney seemed to suggest that it would be a mainstream centrist government if Bush Cheney were elected because of the close margins in both houses. Do you agree with that?
Well, Tim, I think that's the only way you're going to get things done. Let's look at the last 2 years. In the House and in the Senate, we passed campaign reform with bipartisan majorities. We passed a Patient's Bill of Rights, Medicare prescription drugs. We passed a minimum wage increase. There are a lot of things that we could do if Democrats and Republicans will come to the middle, meet, and work together to get these things done. Whoever is president, that's the prescription for getting a lot done that the American people want done.
Governor Bush is talking to 3 or 4 Democratic congressmen he may appoint to his administrations in districts where if they vacated their seat, they'd probably be won by Republicans. Is that a problem for you?
Well, he's got to, if he's president, or if Al Gore's president, they've got to put together a cabinet, and I think it would help either of them if they put some from the other side or some who are more moderate in their cabinet. And I think both of them will
even members of your
that.
caucus?
Absolutely. And members of the Senate or people that have been in the House or the Senate in the past.
If Al Gore loses this election, is he the Democratic frontrunner in 2004?
I would think so, but I think he's going to be president now in the year 2000.
Don't you have a better chance of being Speaker in 2002, running a midterm election with a President Bush than a President Gore?
I don't really buy that. I hear that, but I don't think it's true. I don't think politics works that way anymore. I think we're in a world where voters are very discerning, very independent, and they don't vote for people for Congress depending on who's president or who's not president. I think you win House seats the old-fashioned way with good candidates and run good campaigns.
When do you think this presidential race will be over?
I suspect it'll be over sometime in the middle of December.
Within the next week to 10 days?
It well could, but we don't know. We're in new territory. We've never seen this in our time before. So we're going to have to be patient and let the process, this great thing we have in our country called the rule of law, decide this and do it in a way that we keep everybody together and moving in the right direction.
House Democratic Leader Dick Gephardt, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming next, the legal argument, our guest, the 2 lawyers who stood before the Supreme Court on Friday. Ted Olson for the Bush campaign, Laurence Tribe for the Gore campaign. They are here together on Meet the Press, and they're coming up.
CNBC Asia. Profit from it.
Are you trading with a whole world of buyers and sellers? and getting the best possible price? No question. You have a broker whose only goal is to help you get the best performance. Around the world, around the clock. Instanet. Nothing comes between you and the best price.
Philips brings you Smart Money Minutes.
Looking for an investment in one of these dazzling baubles? The truth is, not all diamonds are created equal. So what's a good buy?
Basically, it's the 4 C's that you look into. Carat weight, it's the first C in the weight of the diamond. The color, clarity, and cut.
When it comes to diamonds, size definitely matters. Clarity is how clean a diamond is. When it comes to color, the most prized color is no color at all. That's because colorless diamonds are extremely rare. And finally, cut. A well-cut diamond reflects light better, hence the brilliance and shine that diamonds are cherished for.
Philips and Smart Money Minutes, making your life better.
Got to admit, it's getting better, a little better, all the time.
TV from Philips. A new way to look at television.
Bulls or bears? Profit or loss? Where's the market heading? Who are the major corporate movers and shakers? Get your wrap-up of the day's trading on Asia Market Wrap.
Japan hitting their lowest.
Analysis and insight from industry experts.
Some funds will be unlocked.
Invest
Keep ahead with Asia Market Wrap and stay out of the red. Weekdays on CNBC Asia. Brought to you by SGI and the Citibank Private Bank.
We are back. Ted Olson, you were the lawyer for George W. Bush. You went before the Supreme Court. We have 6 million jurors watching you right now this morning. Tell them why you believe that the Florida Supreme Court did not act appropriately.
What we feel the Florida Supreme Court did is change the rules of the contest, the counting of votes and the tabulation of who was the winner and how the disputes would be resolved after the election. There's a reason why we set the rules before the game, because those will be neutral, they'll be based upon neutral principles, they will be objective, and the standards will be equal for either candidate. When you start changing the dimensions of the process after the game, you tilt it towards one side or the other. We all want to play the contest or count the votes according to the rules that were set ahead of time. And the Florida Supreme Court changed that.
Justice John Paul Stevens asked you an interesting question during this exchange. Let me roll that for you and give you a chance to respond.
One of the things that's of interest to me is the extent to which you say there was a change in the law. It seems to me that in order to answer that question, you have to know what your view of the law was before this all happened.
I think that we can answer that this way, is that whether it was shall ignore or may ignore, it was not must accept.
Under any circumstance, it was not must.
Under no circumstances was it must accept. Now the second...
Even an act of God or fraud?
I don't believe so.
The justice honing in saying, well, if in fact there was an act of God that prevented these votes being certified or delivered to the Secretary of State by November 14th, wouldn't they be allowed an exception? And you hung tough and said no.
Well, no, we said that the Secretary of State down there, who is vested with the authority by the legislature to decide what are the appropriate circumstances when there might be an extension of the deadline, would have the duty to look at that. There's all kinds of acts of God, which, by the way, were not involved here. The legislature set up a very clear set of timetables for how these things could be done. When you change those timetables, you have the chaos that we've been seeing playing out in Florida, 40-some lawsuits.
So the Secretary of State could exercise her discretion, but the Florida Supreme Court cannot change the deadline.
Well, the Florida Supreme Court cannot change the rules after the game. The legislature very, very clearly said there has to be someone that can make some judgments during the course of the process within various very limited circumstances, and those rules just should not be changed afterwards.
Laurence Tribe, you represent Vice President Gore. You said the Florida Supreme Court did not legislate, did not change the rules, but we're merely trying to interpret, if you will, or reconcile statutes that may be in conflict. Explain.
Well, even more than that, Tim, the fact is the game is over. It ended November 7. People voted. We just haven't been able yet to figure out exactly who got more votes. And all that the Florida Supreme Court did was to say that whether it's an act of God or our own laws that authorize recounts in very close elections, when we're trying to figure out the meaning of this photo finish, it's okay to add 12 days to the process by which you continue the recount. And that was a very minor adjustment in laws that were internally in conflict, because on the one hand, whether the Secretary must accept or may accept these ballots, there was another provision that said very clearly that it's permissible to recount in certain circumstances. And the Supreme Court of Florida pointed out that would have been meaningless if you didn't add a little time. And in fact, if you look at the larger picture, whether 12 days were added or not, under the law that existed before November 7th, these contests that are now going on to contest the election because of some uncounted ballots would continue. And so it's really a question of whether those uncounted ballots get drawn in prior to the certification of the election through a recount process or afterwards through a challenge. And the Florida Constitution is certainly flexible enough for that.
Ironically, because the Supreme Court extended the deadline for filing the votes, if you will, they shrunk the contest period, which Al Gore is now having a very frustrating time because he wants to get the votes counted, as you said, but he doesn't have enough time to make his case, and the Bush people very effectively are saying, we want due process too. We can't rush this.
Well, exactly. Then the fact is that the total amount of time hasn't been added, hasn't been expanded for anybody. And one thing that's especially intriguing here is that the background law in Florida says the right to vote is important. And what was interesting in the argument is several justices seem to suggest that it was impermissible for the Supreme Court of Florida to pay attention to the right to vote because of an 1892 decision of the Supreme Court, which, if you read it carefully on page 39, says that the right to vote, in fact, can be derived from the state constitution. We shouldn't sacrifice the right to vote in order to adjust the deadlines back.
I found it quite interesting in the exchange when Ruth Bader Ginsburg asked you a question and you said, I'm not sure. I want to play that for you and give you a chance to talk about it.
Well, could the state legislature at least now say, in light of all this confusion, we enact a law today saying this is the way electors will be selected?
Well,
is that open to the legislature now?
I'm not sure.
Are you sure now?
I'm no more sure now. And the reason is that federal law seems to say that once the electoral choice has been made, it can't be unmade by a state legislature. On the other hand, there are people who think that aspect of the federal law is unconstitutional. If I had to tell you what my personal view is, it is that although the legislature can come in when the people have not made a choice, it cannot come in to rewrite their choice.
Mr. Olson, Ruth Bader Ginsburg also asked you a question talking about the conflicting statutes, if you will, and she says that if the recount can be asked for up to 6 days after the election, but the votes have to be certified 7 days after the election, it only leaves 1 day. Let's just listen and have you talk about that.
Mr. Olson, may I ask you, because you've been skipping over what I thought was a key piece of the Florida legislation. The Florida Supreme Court said there's the deadline, and that conflicts with another provision of this law, the provision that says there shall be, under certain circumstances, recounts. And then there's a rather detailed description of the process that's necessary. The timeline for when you can ask a recount is on the 6th day.
Up to?
Yeah, up to. And it would be impossible in a populous county to, in 1 day, do what the statute instructs must be done when there's a recount.
She makes a very strong point.
Well, you can ask for the recount right away after the election, and it's up to you to decide when to ask for that recount, and it's completely in the discretion of the county canvassing board as to whether to grant a recount or not. If you wait till the last minute and ask for something to be done that can't be done during the time available, and then they say no because there isn't enough time to do that, that's your responsibility. We have to have standards that guide us, and there are timetables and limits on which all of these things can be done. If you decide to throw a pass at the last minute and you don't have enough time to get your team on the field, that's your responsibility. We have to have an orderly process here, and everybody should want that, and we shouldn't be changing things after the fact to benefit one side or the other.
What will the Supreme Court do, and when will they do it?
If I knew that, I wouldn't be sitting here now. I'd be using those processes of prophecy to become a trillionaire. I don't know what they'll do. I suspect there's a good chance that they will say, you know, we didn't really need to take this case. There's no real federal urgency. And I suspect that whatever they do, they'll do it quite soon.
Monday, Tuesday?
Tuesday, Wednesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I don't know.
But this week?
I would be surprised if it was longer than this week.
What will they do and when?
Well, I'd like to answer that the same way. I certainly don't know. We did our best and put our arguments before the court, and they will decide. I'm rather encouraged that the Gore people would like the court not to decide the case. That gives me some comfort and encouragement. I think that they will decide the case, and I think it will be soon.
And you think it will be decisive?
Well, I think that the court will decide the case and give us a decision. I just don't want to predict what they're going to do, but I do think that they're going to give us a line of decision. The justices were very, very well prepared, as everybody in America knows. They're ready to decide the case on the merits.
Ted Olson, Larry Tribe, thank you very much. Thank you for representing your clients and sharing your information with the American people this morning.
Thank you, Tim.
And we'll be right back right after this.
CNBC Asia. Profit from it.
The next generation of wireless communication is here, and technologies from Agilent are helping make it all possible. We've taken the fiction out of science fiction. Agilent Technologies, dreams made real.
The Taiwanese are among the country's top foreign investors. More than 40,000 businesses have invested at least $30 billion US. For them, rising cross-strait tensions are a genuine concern.
Gil Altman, CNBC Asia, Beijing.
We promise no program misses. With CNBC Asia's program schedule, you'll not only be up to date on our programs, you'll be aware of all airing times with our schedule reminder. This way, you'll never miss your favorite show. www.cnbcasia.com. Keeping you informed, keeping you ahead.
Today only on CNBC Asia.
Brought to you by Nokia, connecting people.
Coming up on Dateline tonight.
Thanks, Tim. It's an ugly fact. Some taxi drivers refuse to pick up people of color. Wait till you see what happened when we sent our cameras out to grab a cab. The story tonight at 8/7 Central on Dateline. Tim?
Thank you, Stone. Start your day tomorrow and Today with Katie and Matt, then the NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw. Stay with NBC News and MSNBC for continuing coverage of Decision 2000 all week. That's all for today. We'll be back next week. If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press, Go Bills, beat the Dolphins without a recount. Go get it.
Cecilia Zecca, only on CNBC Asia.
Faster, more reliable, higher quality, more profitable. Nortel Networks is building the new high-performance internet, and it can be whatever you want it to be. So tell us, what do you want the internet to be?
Come together right now over me. Jump, jump, jump and dive.
Believe it or not, this is your lucky day. The day your hospital got its revolutionary new GE Lightspeed scanner.
Okay, let's go.
In an emergency, when every second counts, the GE Lightspeed is the fastest diagnostic scanner in the world. Yesterday, it would have taken radiologists 20 minutes or longer to scan your injuries. Today, the GE Lightspeed can scan your body in just over 30 seconds. What's more, it produces incredibly detailed images that are more helpful than ever before.
Joe, why don't you take 3 deep breaths, all right? We're going to take real good care of it.
The GE Lightspeed.
How are you feeling?
Does your hospital have one?
Meet the Press has been sponsored by the Archer Daniels Midland Company. ADM. Supermarket to the world.